Buenos días a todos y a todas y a nuestro webinar Eficiencia Energética.
Good morning to all and to this webinar on COVID-19 on transport and urban infrastructure to support the social and economic recovery in Latin America. Thank you very much for joining us today. We understand that the pandemic is hitting and affecting a lot of you in different ways. And we hope that all of you and your relatives and beloved are well. We're very encouraged to see that there's so many participants in this webinar today. My name is Edith Baer. I represent the International Energy Agency. And before giving the floor to Alison Pridmore, our director, I'd like to give you a bit more information on the platform. We have interpretation, simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish. To choose your preferred language, please click on interpretation on the lower part of your screen, and you can select either English or Spanish to hear the webcast in English or Spanish. We would like to hear your comments and questions at the end of the webinar. We've planned for a few minutes of questions and answers. Please write your questions during this webcast and in the space on comments in Spanish and English and Portuguese. And you just click on chat and you'll see the fields where you can write in your answers, your questions, and we will take them. Next slide. This webinar is the third in our series focusing on energy efficiency in the time of COVID-19. Here you see the titles of the first two that we organized. The first one was on how energy efficiency can be a vehicle for economic and social relief and recovery. And the second webinar was on emergency action to support energy efficiency. And today's webinar is the result of the issues that we dealt with in the first two. And we will be continuing the discussion with the guests here. I'm extremely pleased to have a panel with experts of different countries in the region. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Alison Pridmore, who is responsible for transport energy efficiency in the agency, the IEA.
Thank you, Edith. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Alison Pridmore, and I'm the transport lead in the Energy Efficiency Division. I'm really pleased to welcome you all to this webinar on energy efficiency in the time of COVID-19, which is looking at transport urban infrastructure and impacts in Latin America in the context of social and economic recovery. We have an excellent array of speakers and a packed agenda today. As Edith highlighted, there will be the opportunity to ask questions throughout, and please use the chat function provided in Zoom. So in terms of the agenda, really we're going to move from the global to the regional to the city level, from written plans to on-the-ground action. And this is incredibly complementary. And by showcasing real-world examples today, best practice learning, data collection opportunities, opportunities will be facilitated to make plans come alive. So in terms of the global, I'm going to start by providing a very brief overview of the International Energy Agency Sustainable Recovery Plan. And I'll get to that in a few moments. And that will be followed by Mr. Alan Cooperstein, who's going to be talking about the regional level. Mr. Cooperstein is the Deputy Regional Director for Latin America for C40 Cities. After looking at things at the regional level, we're going to be really going local, really looking at the cities. And I'm really pleased to welcome my two speakers on this. One will be covering Buenos Aires. So we have Mr. Dino Buzzi, who works at the Undersecretariat of Mobility Planning in Buenos Aires, obviously speaking about Buenos Aires. And we have Mr. Rodrigo Diaz, who's going to be speaking about Mexico City and who's currently the Undersecretary of Planning for the Mobility Secretariat. So moving on to the next slide. Thank you, Josie. The WIO special report. So earlier this year, the International Energy Agency, in collaboration with the International Monetary Fund, produced a sustainable recovery plan for actions that can be taken over in the next 3 years. It's a very detailed plan, and it's really focused on cost-effective measures and examined a range of sectors, including transport, industry, and buildings. The transport section recognised the importance of action on new vehicles, the expansion of high-speed rail infrastructure, and the role of improving urban infrastructure, hence the focus of today. In total, for the plan, 1 trillion would be spent annually, and of this, 270 billion would be for the transport sector. So that's 270 billion in terms of sustainable recovery for the transport sector. And of this, 26 billion would be for urban infrastructure. And this covers both walk and cycle investment and electric vehicle charging. In terms of the investment between the two, it's a split approximately evenly. So we're looking around 13 million US dollars per year as part of the Sustainable Recovery Plan. And urban infrastructure, and we'll discuss this will come through in the other presentations. And urban infrastructure, investment in urban infrastructure is seen to offer a number of opportunities. The timeliness, recognising the importance and the need for socially distant measures, socially distant actions, and the opportunities for walk and cycle within this. The benefits, the air quality benefits that lockdown had provided were seen as key to integral to beekeeping, as well as some of the access to the long-term health benefits associated with active travel. Short payback periods for consumers once they've invested in a cycle, the opportunity cost is low, and then also the near-term shovel-ready nature of the jobs provided. Next slide, please. So for jobs provision, both walk and cycle infrastructure have large job multipliers, and this results in high levels of potential job creation. So for example, for walk and cycle infrastructure, it is estimated that around 175,000 jobs globally could be created per year under the IEA Sustainable Recovery Plan. As I mentioned, this plan is a 3-year plan, but integral to the plan is on the ground action, understanding what schemes are underway, what impacts can be seen. And I think in terms of sharing best practice, lessons learnt, expectations of impacts to take implementation forward, data gathering, data sharing opportunities, I'm really pleased now to hand over to Ellen, who's going to present some of the action that's been going on at the regional level, and then to my speakers, Rodrigo Diaz and Dino Buzzi, to talk about things at the city level. So Ellen, over to you now.
Hi, Alison. Thank you very much. Greetings to everyone who has joined us. Thank you to the IEA team, to Alison, Edith, Anna for the kind invitation. Also, I would like to salute Rodrigo and Dino. It's a pleasure to share this session with you and to hear from Buenos Aires and Mexico City, 2 of the largest cities in the region who have been taking very innovative and immediate actions regarding the current crisis and tying it also to the climate crisis. So let me share my screen. So I'll be speaking very briefly about what we've been seeing in the region thus far regarding energy efficiency, transport, and COVID-19, and what we've been doing as well. So very briefly, C40 is a city network comprised of 97 cities around the world, 12 in Latin America. I'm currently the Deputy Regional Director, as Alison kindly introduced me. So I work with the 12 cities in the region with the Regional Director, Manuel Oliveira, where we engage with the city governments on a wide variety of actions regarding climate. That includes transport, energy, waste, adaptation, water, urban planning, among others. And although we have less than 100 cities, we work with the largest cities in the world because of their impact. They're a bit less than 10% of the world population, but they represent a quarter of GDP in the world. So we understand that their impact and also their responsibility and their potential for solutions is very high. We are currently led by our chair, who was elected by other mayors, Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, where you can see here, followed by other mayors, perhaps also highlighting that we've had a mayor from Latin America, former mayor of Rio, Eduardo Paes, before passing on to the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, and finally to Mayor Garcetti. And also we're funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, Real Dania, and SIF, who are the main donors to C40, who we thank for all their support. So we are in a climate emergency, and we know that we are in a current sanitary economic crisis that is much more acute, which has to do with the pandemic, but we're still in a climate emergency, and the accomplishment of the Paris Agreement is at risk. And this consequently also increases the risk of climate hazards and climate impacts that are already being felt throughout our region and in all of our cities. Having said that, we understand that the priority right now is health. So we know that every mayor in our network, and that includes every mayor in Latin America, they are still, and as they should, focus on the health crisis and defeating the virus and its impacts, especially human impacts on casualties and hospitalizations, because Latin America still hasn't left the first wave. And we know that it's one of the epicenters, especially here in Brazil. We also understand that it's a global crisis that requires international cooperation, and cities are the most affected. And they're also, as in the climate crisis, key actors in health, social security and protection, and economic recovery policies that will be required for the current crisis. And as the climate crisis, it falls on the most vulnerable in our society, as we know. So just like the climate crisis, this current pandemic can also increase the inequalities that exist in our societies, and we must fight and find solutions that both lessen this impact, but also enjoy this window of opportunity to perhaps change some of the patterns that we see, not only here in Latin America, but across the world. So what do we see in Latin America? So first of all, especially in the first months of March and April, we could see a dramatic improvement in air quality in cities across the region, most of them capitals, as you can see here. This is data from the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, that there was a strong decrease in NO2 and particulate matter 2.5 associated with the decrease in economic activity and isolation. We also know that there was a study, a Harvard study showing that basically for every nanogram per cubic meter, there was an increase of 8% in COVID-19 mortality. And just this week, it was also found that about 15% of COVID-19 casualties can be associated with air pollution. So this is crucial, and this is a factor that we often see cities modeling. We have here again 2 cities that have strong air quality programs, especially Mexico City, which used to be one of the most polluted cities in the world, and through a very comprehensive program and investment has dramatically improved its air quality. Although there's always work to do in big cities, we could see that the disproportionate amount of pollution comes from diesel engine vehicles, because there was never a proportionate response from the decrease in vehicles to the decrease in air pollutants. And that's because most of the vehicles on the streets were diesel vehicles, such as trucks or buses, because they had to keep running. Also, of course, a strong tendency is the decrease in the use of public transport. So here you see also, this is from the IDB, it's a database that they update frequently. This is from the latest update I could get was from October 28th, comparing the behavior of public transport with the week of March the 2nd to March the 8th, which was the last week before the pandemic. And we can see dramatic numbers like Buenos Aires here with 70% decrease. And we can see that some cities have been recovering, but none of them are reaching not even 80% or of what used to be the public transit usage before pandemic. So this is a crucial challenge that cities will face in the region and in the world. Latin America is known for its high usage of public transit, of mass transit, and there's a tendency, there's a concern that this may lead people to using more private cars. And this is something that cities are already looking at. I'm sure we'll see some examples from Mexico City and Buenos Aires, but also in other cities, the mayors and the teams are already looking at how to increase active mobility and other forms of mobility that are more in tandem with the city that we know should be ideal, which does not include a high number of people using private cars for different types of travel. So this is a very good example from the region as well. We see here that even before some European cities, which became famous for using the temporary bike lanes, Bogota, for instance, was one of the first cities in the world. It already has the largest bike lane system in the region, and it increased to 94 in about 2 months with temporary bike lanes. You can see here, this is very cheap, fast interventions, almost tactical interventions. Mexico City did the same with 54 kilometers. You can see here some of the numbers. Other cities as well have increased their temporary bike lanes, and fortunately, cities like Bogota, they're also working on making them permanent. So this was a very immediate response from cities that understood other options had to be provided to citizens to move around in the city that were safe, but also safe in the health perspective, and also healthy, because it creates active mobility that we know from various studies that it's also good for health, and especially in the context of COVID-19, where closed spaces were the key thing to be avoided. So is this the image of the future? This is Bogota. This is a big avenue that was unthinkable to be closed just a few months ago. And right now you can see how the citizens just really take over this opportunity once it's given to them. And we create more equal streets that look at pedestrians, cyclists, and also, of course, you can see buses. This is an exclusive bus lane. So will this be the image of the future? This is something that the pandemic brought or accelerated, and we should really work and strengthen our mayors who have been trying to accelerate this process to create better urban planning, better mobility options for the citizens in the region. But not only that, all of the paradigms that have been some of the bases of our society have been questioned. The oil industry, which we know has been severely hit by the crisis. Urban density, there has been a lot of discussion if urban density is or isn't safe in a pandemic age. Dismeasured consumption, public transport, as we mentioned, distances We know that for human scale travel, it should be no more than 5 to 6 kilometers by bike or 800 to 1 kilometer by foot. This is usually the ideal. So how do we create, for instance, 15-minute city, which is a concept that has been also adopted and is now being absorbed in cities like Buenos Aires, Quito, and Bogota. Trips, individual transportation, and acceptable levels of contamination, knowing that they now are directly related to COVID-19 related deaths. So what are we doing regarding all of these changes and the key decisions that are coming up? So first, during the crisis, we understood that the most important factor was the health crisis and the pandemic. So we hosted several calls among mayors and experts from across the world. We were happy to see that immediately the first call was scheduled just within 2 days, and we had over 45 mayors from mega cities across the world joining, sharing their experiences, but also learning from one another. Based on that very successful interaction, we created a Global Mayors COVID-19 Recovery Task Force that just released its final report on the areas that should really guide a green and just recovery. These include areas such as public mass transit, energy efficiency, renewable energy, green infrastructure. All of these generate more jobs than a business as usual recovery, but also tackle the other crisis, which is the climate crisis, which will not be resolved with a vaccine, which hopefully will be the case for COVID-19. And we continue to support our cities through the thematic networks that we work. Those are the ones I mentioned. So every city can join as many networks as they would like. These are usually spaces where the technical teams can discuss and exchange ideas. So these include, as I mentioned, energy, transportation, adaptation, waste, among others. And finally, I invite everyone to visit and sign up to the C40 Knowledge Hub, where we are sharing all the information that we've been gathering from cities during the crisis, but also more generally regarding climate action. This is open and really invite you all to visit, comment, and get in touch if there are any further questions or information that you'd like. This is my contact and the contact of the Regional Director for Latin America, and I thank you once again for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Ellen. And it's interesting that you touched upon the multiple benefits of increased walking and cycling, the air quality benefits, the health benefits, the climate change benefits. I'd now like to introduce Mr. Dino Buzzi, who, as I said before, is going to be talking about action at the city level. So really got what's going on the ground in Buenos Aires. So Dino, if you'd like to start sharing your screen.
Yes, of course. Just let me. Se ve, ¿no? It is visible.
You can see it.
Okay. Bueno, empiezo, como fue explicado al principio, empiezo a hablar en español.
I'd like to start out in Spanish. It'll make me sound a little smarter in Spanish than in English. That's why I'll choose Spanish and make sure that the interpreter can do the rest for me. Thank you very much to all of you for being online with us. I'd like to echo the enthusiasm and the greetings from that were set forth by Ilan to the other members on this panel. And I'd like to say how pleased I am to be able to tell you about the experiences that we've been having in the city of Buenos Aires in the context of the pandemic, and now in the first steps we're taking to exit the pandemic. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Dino Buzzi. I work in the Subsecretariat of Planning and Mobility. And as we just heard from Ilan, mobility has been a fundamental issue for survival and for livelihood in all of our cities in such a complex situation. For a macro level introduction, I'd like to say that Buenos Aires is a federal district, the autonomous city of Buenos Aires, but we have a daily relationship with the metropolitan area around it. And we work more specifically within what is in blue on the screen here. So a population of approximately 3 million inhabitants and a surface area of 200 square kilometers. Obviously, the metropolitan issue needs to be framed and understood on a daily basis within the broader context. And so what I will be addressing now has to do with the federal district, but just so you understand, up until the pandemic hit, a lot of the trips that were taken, or half of the daily trips in the autonomous city of Buenos Aires, were carried out on public transportation. So this is an overview of the modal split and how people traveled around the city. And as you can see, there's still a big share of private vehicles, but over the last few years, we've been able to increase the share of bicycling, and we'll go into this further in a few minutes, and to make sure that public transport has more passengers. This is something similar to what Ilan just showed a few minutes ago. It basically shows how this chart, the pie chart I just showed, was inactive and went completely offline for a few months, because all of our public transport, which is how huge amounts of people would travel from point A to point B, from home to work to school to doing different errands, was all suspended because of the health and social distancing measures. And this meant that we couldn't keep up the number of trips we had, and there were severe limitations on people's mobility in the framework of a lockdown. How could we run errands, go grocery shopping, help senior citizens, or make sure we were be able to care for people who needed to be cared for because they were sick or elderly or very young? How could we ensure that the basic functions of the city could come closer to our citizens? And the first measure we took, which is a very important initiative, but was very simple infrastructure-wise or technically speaking, and this had to do with promoting closer proximity trips, promoting this 15-minute city we just heard about. So making sure that all of these points that are on the map here, which are central locations in Buenos Aires, which are the heart of neighborhoods, because Buenos Aires was born on corners of avenues at crosswalks around major buildings or on squares. And that is where people tend to go naturally when they go out. And so we knew that these locations were the ones that we had to work on so that people could move around more comfortably while abiding by the regulations and the social distancing and health requirements. And we wanted to make sure that this didn't mean that they couldn't get on public transportation if they had to go grocery shopping, or drive their car if they had to. So in all of these places, what we did was carry out a very simple infrastructure operation. We used paint and plastic poles to separate lanes, to make bigger sidewalks, and to make sure that on these areas we could have a more smooth traffic, and make sure that people could do their grocery shopping the way they had to. Now, currently in Buenos Aires, we're lifting the restrictions, but at that time, we didn't know as much as we do now about the virus, and just being near someone at that point was considered very serious and risky. And so we tried to make sure that people would only travel to closer places, to fresh produce markets, or those are all the orange dots on the map. And these are temporary markets because they're only held a few days a week. And we would try and make sure that we could have traffic suspended for several hours a day so people could go easily to close places where they could do their grocery shopping, so no one had to go on long trips on public transport, and we could make public transport safe for our essential workers or people who really needed it. There's also another issue that is something we have in common with a lot of other Latin American cities, and it had to do with how could we reconcile social distancing in low-income areas. And over the last 10 years, we've been trying to enhance the urban situation with regards to housing, to socioeconomic inclusion, and other issues. But we knew that our low-income areas needed special dedication and a more custom-made solution. And that is why we're showing this grocery store, because we wanted to make sure that we were working with local players, with the business owners and neighbors, and with very little infrastructure, we try to encourage proximity and close trips. But as the pandemic spread, and with all of these measures I've just presented, we created 23,000 new square meters for Buenos Aires residents. These 23,000 square meters were suddenly available for all of us, and we decided to use them to improve pedestrian trips for people and the quality of the space. And just to give you an idea, if you've ever been to Buenos Aires, this is twice the surface area of Calle Florida, which is the first fully pedestrian street in our city, and this process was carried out in the 1960s. And this is usually the reference that comes to mind when we think of pedestrian spaces. But we did this times two throughout Buenos Aires in just under 3 weeks. And then we started carrying out surveys because we knew we needed much more data to figure out if this was working, if these spaces were functioning, were they having a positive impact, and was there any hope that this would be a survival line. And of course, we knew we needed more projects and that this would raise new challenges as well. And the truth is that most people realized that this was a positive measure, first of all, because it facilitated social distancing, which was our main concern, remember, when 2020 was just starting out, and also because it allowed them to travel to other places in the city when they had to do so. But beyond this first assessment, we carried out a second survey, and we asked people, and I'd just like to go a few slides back, because we surveyed all the people that had street fronts, business owners, stores, people who work in all of these storefronts where on the streets where we carried out these interventions, so that we could figure out what they wanted or what they needed in their day-to-day life and in these new spaces. How could we make sure that these spaces didn't just respect social distancing? How could we ensure that they would also facilitate new activities and encourage the secret functioning of interaction, so meaning that we could lower our CO2 emissions and keep people from getting back into their cars? And this is the outcome of the survey we carried out about 2 months ago. And in these spaces, we realized that there was a hidden need. People wanted spaces to sit and wait. Elderly people, when they go to banks and have to wait online, for instance. Parking spaces for bicycles or motorcycles and scooters, which is something that was a major concern for all of us. Plants, we needed the space to make these streets green streets, or improve the environmental quality, because these are highly used avenues in our city, and a few other miscellaneous items such as having space or playgrounds for children, tables for restaurants, and a few other things that always come up, like unexpected and actually funny answers in these surveys. What we did realize is that overall, people wanted to improve these urban spaces. And just to give you an idea, because this is a very small percentage of the work that we've been doing with the team I'm heading, and I think the team is online, and I'd just like to commend my team for the hard work they've done. But each of these businesses was given some space in this new space. So if it was a bar or a clothes store, or if it was a grocery store or a pharmacy, and in each of these spaces, we started designing a specific project so that we could materialize all this information that we've been gathering by discussing this with neighbors and business owners. And currently, we're working on the conceptual design. We're trying to work on what these spaces could look like because they're here to stay, and these interventions should focus on space and mobility, and we want them to continue and make sure that they can be a public-private interaction at a very humble and small level, because we do know we need to keep working with the business owners for all the equipment, the use and the maintenance and upkeeping of everything that we'll be laying out. Now, once we worked on the pedestrian issue and on the proximity travel issue, there's something else I wanted to tell you about, and it has to do with the longer trips, because not everyone could just go out to do their grocery shopping or go to the pharmacy or run an errand. Many people had to keep working. And just a few minutes ago, we were discussing this with the people who are organizing the webinar, because we mentioned the issue of the many challenges that arose in this context. And there's something that we set up to encourage cycling and bicycle lanes, and we set up a 10 Commandments kind of document. I don't want to make it sound too spiritual, but we decided that the time was right and that it was our golden hour of bicycling in Latin America and Buenos Aires and around the world. And there are some people, because I'm sure you know many of these principles, but some are more specific to Buenos Aires. So of all of these daily trips in Buenos Aires, 66.5% go from 1 to 5 kilometers. So these are short trips. These trips could obviously be carried out on bicycles or even just by walking. Obviously, bicycles take up much less space. We know that we couldn't take the risk or give ourselves the luxury of thinking that everyone who was going to step off public transport from that pie chart I showed you at the beginning get into a car. That isn't sustainable. It isn't sustainable for cars or for bicycles. And we needed to make sure that people would shift towards bicycles as much as possible. And there's something significant. It has to do with jobs and work. And this is something new because it happened in 2019. We started seeing all these e-commerce apps. Last year, there were approximately 10,000 active cyclists for a delivery throughout the city. And there was a sudden hike of 5,000 extra active cyclists at the beginning of 2020. And I think we're at approximately 20,000. That means we doubled the number over a year. So that's 20,000 new cyclists who are traveling fast, who are traveling a lot, and who have their own specific mobility trends throughout the city. And it's something we need to take into account. And last but not least, I'm sure you know this, but even in an economic downturn or yet another downturn in Argentina and Buenos Aires, there was an unprecedented increase in bicycle sales and on demand for bicycle repairs. Mercado Libre, and I'm sure that all the Latin Americans online know what this website is. It's our Alibaba or Craigslist. And the increase in bicycle sales in an economic crisis is truly a landmark. This is a chart about web searches on buying bicycles, and it was a higher number every month. So considering all of this, we realized that the time had come to put more pressure on a network that in 2019 or 2020 looked like this. You know that Buenos Aires has had a very active policy on cycling for a long time now. And so we have this network, which is significant. It spreads throughout all the neighborhoods in the city, and it provides for a safe and sustainable mode of transportation throughout the city. But what was I saying? Because of the 10 Commandment idea, we realized that we needed to do something that we'd had in mind for a long time, but we were postponing. And it had to do with taking our avenues, our main avenues, the main channels that people use to travel throughout the city, and even in our mental picture is something you take when you want to go very fast from point A to point B without having to take a shortcut or without having to go somewhere else in the middle. And that is why we decided to rethink how we were using these avenues for bicycles, because we also knew that many people were using them, but that they weren't being given sufficient protection. And for all the reasons that I just mentioned, we knew we had to work on this.
Donde estas son todas avenidas que obviamente, como pueden ver en la estructura,
These are all avenues that you can see and that are going to represent the center of the city. And we started with the two most difficult avenues, Avenida Córdoba and Avenida Corrientes. And in some of them, there are universities, residential areas, there are areas where there's high and low density. So it's complicated for the public transport. In Chacarita and Avenida Corrientes here, which is one of the best known avenues. It's where there are theaters, bars, bookstores. So we knew that not only did we have to change the infrastructure, but we're also making a statement, a political statement on what the future of mobility in the most important avenues of Buenos Aires are going to be, and in all of the city. So this is the trend of business as usual in the past years, from 2009 and 2019. In 2009, there was very little cycling culture. There were no cycling lanes, and we managed to increase them moderately, although we did something. This is obviously the total. But what we started realizing and what we started doing in these avenues, for instance, in Avenue Corrientes, the increase is 201% in the number of cyclists per year. And we're also working a lot on gender policy. And the major increase was that of women, 19%, because there were fewer women than men and a large gender gap between the use of bikes by women and men. And this has been noted in both Córdoba Avenue and Corrientes Avenue. The increase has been 232% in a year. So this gives us major satisfaction. And we've understood that this is the path we have to follow. So this first success that we're still working on and we're still assessing, and we're trying to see where we have to continue to intervene, has made us become even more ambitious. As you see on the dotted line, what our cycling objective was by 2023 and in a business as usual model. But with all the avenues we're working on and with all the new reforms that we're planning to develop, we could even reach 1 million daily cycling trips by 2023. And this is an objective that we feel we can achieve, because thanks to these first measures in the first few months of the pandemic, we've realized that it would be possible. And to conclude, I would say that, and I think we had already mentioned this in a previous webinar, as advice for other cities, I think that there's a determining point, which is timing. There is a point in time at which it's like the iceberg in Hemingway's literature. Between 201 and 232% is a point that is very characteristic. And we had been working on this for years now through different activities, some of which were technical, others were more social. And as Ilan was saying about the temporary lanes, even if we started a bit later with these new biking lanes during COVID times, we understood the problem much better. And we took advantage of exactly the right point to start working on it. And we knew that from there on, we could reap many benefits. And so there's a political point in time, a technical point in time, and a world moment that have to be coordinated to make sure that these projects succeed. Thank you very much to all. And I was really very happy to share this with you.
Thank you, Dino. That was fascinating. And one thing I picked up was the inclusivity, the accessibility of the measures, like across the board to vulnerable people, economically vulnerable, gender issues, the sort of creating the space in the beginning. So I really picked up on that. I'll now hand over to Mr. Rodrigo Diaz from Mexico City to talk about the Mexico City experience. Rodrigo, over to you. You want to share your slides.
Okay. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good night to everyone. I'm really glad to be participating in this webinar. Since Spanish is still my favorite language, I'll do my presentation in my native language. Hola, bueno, días.
Hello again. I'm going to give you a very short summary of our strategy and mobility in Mexico City during the COVID pandemic. We have to understand what we're talking about when we talk about Mexico City. The metropolitan area covers about 21 million inhabitants, and Mexico City, which is in the southern part, there are almost 9 million people. And the rest are 59 municipalities of the state of Mexico, and a large majority of the trips are to go to Mexico. If we look at the modal split, it's very important. What we see is that the motor vehicle trips for 2/3 are done in public transport. And here, a very important point. If we look into detail of how this public transport is split, a large percentage, almost 60%, is done in suburban buses that are hardly regulated, microbuses, and it's a system that's almost on the verge of being informal, and at least with very little regulation. And therefore, it is very hard. It was very hard to cover this type of transport by measures related to COVID. And they're not at all managed by the state. If we look at the mobility trends, I think that all the cities resemble each other, whether it's Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, or Mexico City, and almost all Latin American cities, the situation is similar. And in the past few months, we have seen a gradual increase in the number of trips, but mostly in private modes of transport that are much faster than in public transport. And this is more or less a general trend. And there's a greater use of private vehicles. It's a good thing for bikes, it's a very bad piece of news for motor vehicles, especially if we're talking about a trend in the region. And despite the increase in the number of trips, these trips are shorter distances. What some data show is that the local trips have increased. And what's very important, and I will insist on this, there's a difference in the schedules of transport. So actually, there are more people that are traveling off peak hours, which is a good piece of news, especially for public transport. And there's an explosive growth of delivery services. And sometimes it's done by the very large, like Amazon type of businesses, but some of them are very small and they're very local. And the methods used are very, very basic, and some go through WhatsApp, and this is also done on bicycle. So this is the traffic trend between March and January. Sorry. In April and May, the reduction of number of trips on a normal week decreased almost by 80%. But now business is opening again, so they're going up. Although there was less of an increase in public transport. Here you see the metro trend. Between April and May, there was a decrease of 80%, and now it's only about 45%. The same goes with the BRT system. And this is an important graph. These are the trips per industry, per economic sector. On the upper part of the graph are local trips. And what this shows is that people are moving around, but in their neighborhood. They're staying much more local. But it is increasing clearly. And this should be taken advantage of. It's very positive. So to summarize, there is an increase in individual transport, which is good if you're talking about bikes, but it's very bad news if you're talking about motor cars. And the loser, obviously, is public transport that has shown a very major decrease in use. So what are the main challenges? First of all, we have to keep social distance despite the fact that the number of trips is increasing, and we have to avoid the shift from sustainable modes to motor vehicles. So we're going to have to guarantee financial sustainability of public transport because they have been affected and lost a lot of income. And that means that the state will have less income to be able to sustain them. And to sustain the process of technological improvement is going to require more financial resources. And in an economic crisis situation, we're going to have to find ways of better using the scarce resources. So what are the strategies? First of all, protection for operators and users, implementation of hygiene and health measures, and also prevention measures, individual prevention measures, and the other strategy is transport demand management. This is something we've learned with the pandemic. We have to optimize the transport supply. And there are measures to manage the transport demand that are focusing on decreasing the numbers of trips to redistribute them better, and obviously social distancing measures in public transport, buses and metros. And we've also talked about emerging infrastructures, temporary cycle lanes, broadening the pavements, etc., sidewalks. And now I'm going to talk about a few measures. We've carried out campaigns, we've carried out advertising campaigns. This was for the use of the mask and social distancing measures. This was for the tramway, and they're followed and respected, especially in places where there are a lot of crowds. So we have this type of signposting, and this was in the first weeks of the pandemic. That's why many of the passengers are not wearing masks. But we also worked with transport operators, and we left half of the microbus empty to make sure that there was social distancing. And this is the most important part. Here, this is what we're trying to do to measure how people are, how to avoid peak hours if you're going to travel, and to be able to better use all of the fleet. And here is a graphic of demand for motor transport. As the number of trips is decreasing because teleworking is working well, and some businesses can open later or can plan their schedules differently, we have differences. We had greater differences, and now we've smoothed them. This is the hourly demand for the use of urban highways. And here is also the metro hourly demand curve. In the red and orange line, we can see that there are less peaks. That means that people are using transport less at peak hours, and they're traveling more comfortably. And this shows this as well. The angle is much smoother. That means that we're distributing all the trips much better. And this is something that is a true gain. It's just like by extending pavements. We can manage traffic, we can manage demand. Fewer trips, but better distributed throughout the day. And some businesses are opening later, and the hours are adjusted. From what we calculate, 35% of the working population is better off. So here we have the emergent cycle lanes. This is an Insurgentes. It goes from north to south, and it has been used. 50% of it has been used, and this was supported by loans of bicycles. We've also expanded sidewalks. Some restaurants can use parking spaces to put tables and chairs for clients, and that improves the situation for the restaurant businesses that have suffered enormously from the pandemic, because they can respect social distancing and have more clients. And here we have the pedestrianization of streets. We have shown how on some sides we can open the businesses and the shops, and the other sides they're closed. And here we just did away with all, we made it totally pedestrian and did away with all the cars. And this is what it looked like. And there isn't too much traffic, but because of informality that we really can't control, There are a lot of people, and all the measures were implemented have to be well planned. And we're learning a lot from this, and we're adjusting as we go. All of this is well documented through publications. And what I was saying about the funding, the financing of public transport is still work in progress. It's very important. Users can't bear the brunt of the pandemic, but businesses are, and the economy has been very hardly hit. So we have to try and optimize the fleet management. And we have to find new ways of subsidizing it, new financial sources. For instance, there are petrol grants and things like that. So this is a crisis that we could have done without. But since it is there, we have to see it as an opportunity, and it gives us opportunities. It's an opportunity to massify and consolidate travel demand management strategies. And if we make sure that businesses work with more flexible schedule, there will be fewer trips and they will be better distributed. And this is great news for cities. There's an increase in the use of bicycles and of people who are walking, and this has to be leveraged. There has been a very quick modernization of administrative procedures. We had to digitalize a lot of things and a lot of procedures for all sorts of authorizations, and we have to think that streets are flexible. They can be adjusted. They're adaptable spaces. They have to be considered as such. And clearly, I think that the time has come to do what we've always wanted to do, because now people are willing to believe in things that just a year ago were unimaginable. So 40 kilometers of cycling lanes, if we had suggested it last year, we would have been told that we were crazy. But now there really is an opportunity to create an alternative for people. And it worked. We did it. It's been very well accepted. The buy-in was great. And we should not waste this opportunity. This is the message that I would like to leave you with. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. And I could see the temporal aspect coming out as well as the local aspect. So I think early on there were synergies between yours and Dino's presentations in terms of the role of pedestrianisation, in terms of the role of local space. But I think the link with the kind of, the shifting of patterns over time, I think was a very interesting point. I'm going to move now to questions and answers. And I think the first one really is for Dino and Rodrigo, and it's about dealing with stakeholders. I mean, the question itself is, what problems have cities had with the behaviours of car drivers, and how have they solved them, or what solutions have been proposed? So I think I suppose it's dealing with perhaps people who are initially less engaged. How has that been tackled? Dino, would you want to start on answering that one?
Sí, muchas gracias, Alison.
Yes,
Obviamente,
thank you very much, Alison. Well, obviously, as Rodrigo just mentioned as well, the issue of cars was often conceived of as a necessary evil. We thought there would be an uptick in car trips, especially at first, and we thought this was inevitable. And that is why we decided we needed to make sure that this would only be a temporary move and that we could witness a decrease in a second stage. It was very helpful for us to have a very clear communication strategy. We had a massive PR campaign on social media, on high-level authorities, ministers, subsecretaries, the mayor even on some occasions. encouraging people to use bikes if they could, and if they couldn't and they had to drive their car, to do it as less as possible, and understand that the city had been disrupted in a way that was totally unprecedented. This was a more macro level approach. On a micro level approach, for instance, when it had to do with the work to widen the sidewalks or build bicycle lanes, we had to carry out a very patient territorial endeavor. For instance, the issue of parking spaces. This is something that all of us who work on cities come up against. We had to send out teams and meet with business owners one by one, with neighbors one by one, and carry out campaigns a whole week before the work started, so that people would remove their cars if they were parked there, and explain that maybe this space would now be delivered to people so that they could wait online or do their grocery shopping, but that they could no longer park or stop there. We also left flyers on the car windshields, and we did this really as artisanal field work, because it was a highly local impact. Suddenly, streets that were full of cars, with cars sometimes parked in double space, with people getting out of the car to pick something up, were something that we were wiping off the map all of a sudden. And regarding bicycle lanes, and this is something that we're still doing now, we worked hard on logistics, on delivery, unloading, working on trucks, on bigger vehicles and their access. And if you're familiar with these avenues, remember that this is a major issue. That is why in the project design and then in the implementation, we worked hard with all of the transporters and delivery companies to communicate face to face, to make sure that they would understand that this street would be functioning differently than how it had been functioning for the last 10 years. And this isn't something easy. Maybe Rodrigo can add to that based on his experience in Mexico City. But this meant being very patient and very consistent and perseverant. We know that with just issuing new rules and enforcing them, it's not enough. It has to do with territorial engagement and communication.
Thank you, Dino. Rodriguez, would you like to come in and add in from the angle from Mexico City?
A ver, lo que yo veo es que la pandemia nos da la
What I
oportunidad.
think is that the pandemic has been an opportunity to establish new allies. When we set up the bike lanes, I never said that this was to benefit cycling. I never said that we wanted more urban bicycles. I said that this had to do with public health. And if you frame it as a public health issue, you get more support from people who usually would disagree with these measures. And so I never say we're promoting sustainable transport. No, what I say is this is a public health measure that is targeting protecting the population. What this means is that we have achieved significant support, but unfortunately, I'd like to be very clear about this. As the situation gradually drags out and becomes the new normal, we will start losing some of the support. The situation isn't gathering as much support as it was 3 or 4 months ago, but at least we gave it a try. And even people who disagreed, and I'd like to say that when I discussed this with the Bank Association to have them open, instead of opening at 9, which they've always done, and I asked them to open at 10 a.m., they said, look, I don't like it, but I understand why you're doing this, and so we will do it. And then we moved on to discuss other issues. And I said, okay, this is interesting. So this means that we have changed the terms of this debate, and this is something that we need to use to our advantage.
Thank you both. And then I've got another question that's come in about electric metro buses and plans for Buenos Aires and Mexico City. So I think this ties in with some of the air quality multiple benefits that the cities have received, and kind of the step change when people do move more back to public transport, what action is being been taken in terms of the electrification of public transport. So, Dino, I don't know if you wanted to go first.
Digamos que esto no tiene nada que ver con lo que estamos hablando, pero de
Well,
todas maneras.
this doesn't have much to do with what we've been discussing, but yes, we could address this issue. We have a composite electric bus. We have 10 of them. We have a first one, and it's been working pretty well. It's been functioning for just a month or two now, so it's too soon to tell. But regarding the quality of trips, it has been a significant contribution. And I'd just like to stress something. When we raise the issue of electric buses, it doesn't have to do with an environmental contribution as much as a quality of trips and a reputational issue. And it gives an extra impulse to systems that aren't as attractive as they could be. So for the time being, I think it's too soon to assess this, but the data we have is encouraging. The situation in Buenos Aires is similar. Last year, we had an interesting test with line 59, which is our local version of the rapid transit bus, your BRT in Mexico City. And the first statistics and assessments regarding emissions were very positive. And I agree with Rodrigo, beyond the environmental benefits and the big picture has been that there has been a lot of positive feedback about the experience of traveling because of the noise, because it's much more comfortable for all these reasons. But now that we're done with this first trial, we have to move into the assessment phase and, of course, adjust parts of the plan and make it fit the financial and economic realities of 2020, which are very far from the estimates and the forecasts we had last year for today. But we have teams, and there are different initiatives to provide continuity for some of these policies that are fundamental and complement the other policies we've been discussing today.
Thank you. I think now if I hand back to Edith, who's got some further housekeeping advice.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. And I'll switch to Spanish just because I think that most of our speakers are native Spanish speakers. Solo quería decir muchas gracias primero.
I just wanted to thank, first of all of you, Alison, Ilan, Dino, Rodrigo, and Ana Lepure, who organized this webinar. This has been a truly fascinating debate, and I'd like us to continue with the Q&A for another hour, but I know that we all have different things to do now. But I'd like to sincerely thank you and thank all of the participants for being with us today. We will be sharing the slides and the webinar's recording. You'll all get the link. And we will also send out a very short survey that will help us assess today's webinar and better understand your priorities in the organization of our future webinars. So once again, thank you very much. For those of you where it's midnight, good night. If it's the morning where you are, have a good day or good night. Thank you very much.
Gracias a todos.